Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The title is Where Has All the Concrete Gone? And I'd start by remembering those of us who are old enough of a very old song. And sometimes I feel that the refrain from those who care about the countryside is that all the flowers have already gone and the countryside is already totally concreted over. I shall hope to show that that isn't exactly true. Nor is it I'd say, and you know this, Simon, with a good sense of history, a new topic at all. This face will be unfamiliar to most of you. It's the face of Lewis Silkin, the Minister for Planning under the Clement Attlee Labour government of 1945. Lewis Silkin actually was the person who stopped urban sprawl in Britain by bringing in the Historic Town and Country Planning Act of 1947. But he also, the year before, brought in an act to build new towns. And the first was to be built at Stevenage. And when he went there to speak to the extremely angry inhabitants, they let his tyres down and he couldn't get out. And the next day they plastered over the station names on the station and renamed the station Silkingrab. But nevertheless, we got Stevenage, and we did get 28 very fine new towns because we managed in those days, those far-off days, to balance carefully the preservation of the countryside and the construction of a lot of homes for a lot of people who needed them. Now, I won't apologise, Simon, for giving you some diagrams from the Barker report because what it does show is that there's a massive growth of new households expected over the next 30 years, at the same time as we've been building fewer and fewer houses. Now, this is totally unaffected by short-term changes in the property market. Sure, house prices can go down. Sure, they will go up again. Their tendency has always been, over the medium and longer run, to ratchet upwards. And it is an absolute fact that if we think reasonably long-term, as we must as planners, that we shall need these homes over the next 25 to 30 years. Homes don't get built tomorrow morning in the fields. They get built as a result of an extremely long planning process. And that's what we're now facing. And we have been facing the most extraordinary crisis in the relation of house prices to earnings. And if we get some welcome relief from this over the next few months, and I doubt it will last that long, then we shall be just going again up an upward trend. Now, it was for that reason, and it is for that reason, that government, to its eternal credit, has really taken on the mantle of Lewis Silkin once again, and over the last 4 years introduced a series of extremely bold initiatives. The Sustainable Communities Initiative, 3 major growth corridors along major transport lines out of London. Here they are, carefully structured so as not to build on the green belt, despite John Prescott's famous malapropism. And on the right of this picture is a sub-regional strategy for one of those corridors, showing exactly how towns will grow to a modest degree, leaving still vast areas of traditional English green countryside still preserved, and the same for the corridor leading up the M11 motorway. More recently, we've seen that, in fact, bold as these plans are, they are not yet delivering the numbers of new homes we need. Our performance in building new homes in this country is absolutely pathetic compared with our obvious comparators like Switzerland or Germany or Ireland. Ireland isn't to be extolled as an example. It's got a weak planning system, but no one can say that either Switzerland or Germany have weak planning systems, yet they manage to deliver the homes that are needed. And so we have going on from this the growth centres on which we were actually expecting an announcement this week, but we haven't got one. And most recently, and most controversially, if you read the Daily Telegraph every morning, the eco-towns, which are exciting a number of people, probably quite unnecessarily, in a number of locations. So that's the background to tonight. And what I'd like to do is suggest to you, in the limited time, that there are good and bad arguments here. The bad argument is we must save farmland because we need it as farmland. The good argument is that we should so plan as to give people a choice of access to public transport, shops and schools, by public transport as well as by car, not forcing them out of their cars but giving them a real choice, and so concentrating growth around places with excellent public transport, and also raising densities in places, but no need to go very high or very dense, an argument I'll develop in a moment. Now, the first point to make, which will surprise some people, but it just happens to be a fact, is that we are a very little developed country. Only 14% of the total land area of the UK, 19% if you just choose England, less than 1 hectare in 5, is developed. And almost certainly these are overestimates because of the way the figures were produced. Our latest figure goes back nearly 20 years when we only had just over 10% developed in England. And the realistic figure is probably closer now to 12 or 13% than it is to 19%. Not only this, but even more astonishing, very large areas of so-called agricultural land in England, including southern England, are actually lying idle, growing weeds under EU set-aside arrangements. These percentages average for England around 5%, and in the southeast of the country, remarkably 8.5%, rising to as high as 9, 10, or even in excess of 11%, including in some of the counties where house building on green fields is actually most controversial. There is something wrong here. Now, 10 years ago, as you've mentioned, Rita, we had the Urban Task Force, and this recommended, and we did all sign up to this, that we should try to raise the brownfield quotient, the proportion of new development for residential on brownfield, from 56%, which it was then, to 60%. What has actually happened is that by 2005, the proportion had risen spectacularly to 77%. Now, you could say that's good, you can say that's bad. I say it's rather more bad than good because of what has been associated with it. Because when we come to look at the question of densities, the Urban Task Force also wanted to raise the deplorably low densities at the lower end of the scale, which were lower than 25 new units to the hectare, and get us up to a minimum of round about 30. In fact, by 2005, we'd already got to 40. And as Martin, you will know, the Urban Task Force came back. It reconvened itself. John Prescott wasn't madly pleased, but he got used to it. And at this point, we split. You, the majority, wanted to raise the brownfield quotient and densities even higher. I had to say, sorry, signing a minority report tucked in a modest little paragraph. But the most dramatic expression of this is what's happened to the pattern of housing. Just before we convened in the task force 10 years ago, at the time when Tony Blair was just being elected, 85% of all the new units were houses. Flats were 15%, of which 2 bedrooms, the notorious 2 bedrooms, were 8%. Look at what happened 10 years later. Houses down to 53%, flats up to virtually half the total, and 35% of all the units being built in this country were 2-bedroom apartment units. Now, does this make sense? Well, of course it doesn't make sense, because the latest evidence is that we've got empty homes all over the place, but these empty homes are the notorious 2 bedrooms in the centres of cities like Leeds, Manchester, Birmingham, Hull, and even in places London. And one estimate that in Manchester it may be up to 40%. This is a syndrome, I think, as the builders have simply built to people who are buying off-plan, often speculatively, buy to let, which has actually become buy to leave, and we have this disaster. Now, all this is totally contrary to all the evidence, the survey evidence of what people want. And you can quote survey after survey after survey that shows that we actually don't like living densely in cities. We do it if necessary in London, but we won't do it if we can avoid it. The most reliable new evidence was done by Mori for CABE, the Commission for Architecture and Built Environment, 3 years ago. And here are the figures. Half the population want to live in a detached house. And a detached house is the most popular choice, whoever we are, whatever our ethnic basis, whatever our social status. And just to fortify this, an email that came through to me this afternoon at 2:01 in the afternoon. Savills research with Design for Homes and Value and Velux studied nearly 4,000 children's drawings of their dream home. They found most children imagining themselves living in a detached family home in the country. That's out of the mouths of babes. And I quote it for what it's worth. I think it's worth a great deal. Now, related to this is the argument, which I'd like to be able to develop more fully, that we don't get that much from raising densities. Now, Martin, you will know this. This was research done at your old firm, Llewellyn Davis, some years ago by Patrick Clark, who's joined you in your new firm. And it shows that as you go above 30 dwellings to the hectare, the bonus you get is respectable going up to 40, and then it drops spectacularly as you go from 40 to 50, and even more as you go from 50 to 60, because you have to provide fixed amounts of schools, shops, clinics, hospitals, playing fields, parks, streets, in fact, all the things you have to provide in ratio to the people as you drive up the densities. So the moral is that underlined by Raymond Unwin, the pioneer Garden City architect, nearly 100 years ago, to be exact, 96 years ago, in his pamphlet, Nothing Gained by Overcrowding. I wish I could devote 10 minutes to this really, really important table from from David Rudlin and Nick Falk of Urbed. But the bottom line is that to support a decent bus service, you need a density of around 30 dwellings to the hectare. To support a tram service or light rail, you need 60. But we're not going to build many tram systems in this country. Now, we can build in a variety of different ways and a variety of different densities. And we do have a few, very few, good practice examples. Some of them significantly in extensions to new towns we built in the 60s, like the Hamptons, designed by David Locke's practice, which is just starting to build on the old brickfields south of Peterborough, or Upton, similar location south of Northampton, or in the Thames Gateway corridor, Ingress Park, a remarkable development of extraordinary quality by Crest Nicholson, and one which is actually served by a very interesting transit system. So the models are there. And I mentioned that transit system. In the newest development just about to start near to Ingress Park, a medium density development will be served by a new bus transit system which is already operating, although not through this development, which at present is an abandoned chalk quarry. And it provides an interesting example of how you can structure environmentally sustainable new developments, whether on greenfield or brownfield, around very strong transit routes. And this particular transit route will take you to the new Ebbsfleet train station, which in just over a year's time will take you into St Pancras on the new commuter trains in only 17 minutes. That's what it looked like a few years ago, and that's what it will look like, or something like this, when it's finished. And it will be a model, together with these others, of how to do it. So to conclude, we are going to need a lot of homes, both brownfield and greenfield, within what we call, in a recent research study, the megacity region up to 100 miles from central London. What we do know about this region is that although it's highly interconnected, it's also comprised of towns and cities which, if you go beyond around 40-45 miles from London, are remarkably self-contained. 70, 75, even 85% of people live and work in the same small region. So that if you can provide transit systems like the one in the Thames-Kent side, Kent-Thames side, you can actually recreate the vision of Ebenezer Howard, the Garden City pioneer more than 100 years ago, of towns against a background of open country. And that was what he created in Letchworth, in Garden City, complemented later by Stevenage and Hatfield New Towns. We need more such social cities, compact, plenty of green countryside, but connected by high-quality public transport. We have models in the uncompleted central Lancashire New Town. Colin Ward and I suggested something like this in a book we published 10 years ago. And, of course, the Milton Keynes South Midlands South Regional Strategy is essentially the same kind of strategy. And up on that M11 corridor, they are just beginning to construct something rather remarkable, a 20-mile bus transit corridor serving one new development, and hopefully in the longer run 2 or 3 such developments in a cluster northwest of Cambridge. So to conclude, we know how to do these things. There is a room for debate about the sizes, the distances of pieces of these clusters, whether we should have many small settlements versus a few larger ones, how many should be urban extensions versus completely new towns, what exactly the densities should be, whether they should be 30, 40, or even in places 50 or 60, what agency should build them, which is something up to now the government's been a little coy about. But finally, despite any short-term blip in the housing market, the question is how to build faster and better. And finally, how to capture some of the resulting land value uplift for the public purse in order to support the infrastructure, not merely elements like bus rapid transit, but also the schools and the hospitals that will have to go into those places and will have to be provided by the public purse. Quite an agenda, but we're finished. Yes, quite an agenda, but I think we're capable of it if we show the same spirit as Lewis Silkin showed 60 years ago. Thank you very much.